So I had a few things on my mind, and then obviously we're going to this meeting, we're attending this meeting tonight around having your own voice and group think. And it really took me to the lovely article. I really like this article in Therapy Today that the author is Max Marnau. I apologise to her because I can't read her name properly. She's a person-centred therapist, art and poet living in the Scottish borders, working in private practice. Since she has branched out into discovering that she's autistic, she has branched out into training and writing, and she's also founded the international online peer group Autistic Counsellors and Psychotherapists, which now has 1,600 members.
Wow.
And it's a lovely piece on self-disclosure and the autistic therapist. Yeah. So I think it's a really good discussion for any therapist, not just an autistic therapist. But I really like the article, so I want to throw that out there. But that very much, let's look at the article like you do, Sam, and let's look at it from a different angle as to argue with it, but argue also for what else we could think about it from it. So I'm going to pull out some things I've kind of scribbled, and it'd be really nice to hear your take on it. So in the case of autism, the situation is radically different. Until recently, and to a surprising extent still, autistic people have been the object of research and discussion by autistic people. We were the done to. I don't like done to because I don't think research is done to. I think language around everything, language makes meaning. You talk about that a lot, but I don't feel done to. Just as an autistic and ADHD person, I think it's to understand that you can't be done to if you're not deliberately done to. People want to understand this. Can't help it if you're neurotypical or neurodivergent to have any of those separations. We're people trying to understand those configurations of ourselves.
We are, but that's a really contentious topic at the moment, even if I just think about it from the research point, because there's a big thing in research about decolonizing research and the notion that basically it's well, my interpretation of this very complicated topic at the moment is about how much informed consent do we have of what we are involved in. So if I think about this idea of done to, it's kind of like you can't say that there's no areas in which we're not done to, because systems are systems.
No, absolutely.
So I think there are those distinctions between, I think there's something about, but this feels personal really. I think there's something about my sensitivity to feeling done to is sometimes about my feeling of powerlessness. But it's also about not having been invited into something, but rather it's assumed that I will. You're smiling. Tell me what you're smiling at.
Just being invited into taps into loads of my stuff.
But if you put that in the context of clients, because again, there's this idea about decolonizing therapy. We've got this very white-centric, Eurocentric perspective on the systems that we're in, and actually how oppressive that is to lots and lots of different people. If we're talking about neurodivergence, so therapy doesn't look the same for everybody, but we are taught the same version of therapy. Not the same modality, I don't mean that, but kind of the idea that a client may not be engaged if they can't make eye contact. And we know from a neurodivergent perspective that that's not true. So, but if we do therapy to rather than do with, then we are expecting somebody who doesn't make eye contact or somebody who is mute in some, in some situations to do therapy our way.
She does talk about boundaries and she talks about self-disclosure. I think I've lost my train of thought a little bit on this. I think because if I forget what I've circled round, what is relevant to me is the appropriateness of self-disclosure. And what she talks about is because we might have experienced something like somebody else who was neurotypical, we can relate to that. But part of me questions we can never relate to anybody else's experience. We can only hear theirs, because my experience is different from anybody else's.
Yeah,
so I think there's a caveat to have with that, that yes, we may have the same diagnosis, or we may be autistic or ADHD, but it doesn't mean we are the same. There's too many other configurations in play. That just one, it just feels, I don't know, it just feels different. Yes, I can sit in a room with a client that sits and plays with their head, you know, not looking at me, or a parent looking the other way and never making any eye contact, because I understand that's a presentation and that's a norm, or that's a function to keep themselves calm, maybe.
Yeah.
So, you know, if we learn to understand each other and the different elements and presentations of each other, that's more important. But you're only learning someone's presentation in the room with them. You can't assume what that presentation might be about, because there are lots of autistic people I meet that do make really good eye contact because they're really well practiced. So if you're really not engaging and paying attention, you know, you could completely miss that part of them, that actually their eye contact is forced or learned, or they've adapted to use it and manage it because they've learned a skill. We can't, you know, that skill, that eye contact might be a skill they've learned and they're okay with it, you know, so we can presume, oh, they make eye contact, they can't be autistic, or they don't make eye contact, they might not want to.
Yeah, that's reminding me of that like meme that goes round, doesn't it? It's like, but you don't look autistic. It's that is what you just said, or that's how I received what you just said.
Yeah.
So what does Max say about that relating to the self-disclosure though?
Let's have a see. If being an expert by experience is not the norm, unlike in the field of like spiritual abuse, she says, then providing autistic therapists for autistic people requires that we out ourselves publicly. And as I suggest, this raises certain issues and requires us to address and maybe rethink this highly sensitive area, whose boundaries are presented in most therapy training as uncrossable. So she's arguing for the outing, but to what purpose is that outing? She's so I'll carry on with that a bit. She says about, in Roger's own words, congruence is, if I understand it correctly, the therapist being that self which is he truly is in the counselling room. It does not mean telling a client everything that comes to mind, but for an autistic therapist, it would seem to include not camouflaging or masking. If I do not have the self-esteem and courage to be the self that I truly am, how can I expect my client to be their true self? Good point.
I feel like she's taken that out of my mouth, because that's exactly what I hold myself to account for and have done for a long time, really, even before diagnosis came along. And if I think about my last 2 years of study, an awful lot of that has been about, who am I in the room? Am I presenting authentically? Am I congruent? When am I congruent? What is my presence in the room? What's the impact of that on the other person? You know, so, and I do think I also recognise that if we do self-disclosure, it's got to be for the benefit of the client and the, you know, their therapeutic benefit. But then on the other side, I'm thinking about something that Myra Khan said in a training course that I went to, was about how we make disclosures even if we're not making disclosures. So just by the way that we present ourselves in the room, have I got, you know, what cardigan have I got on today? You know, what glasses am I wearing? Am I wearing lipstick or not? She talks about all of that being disclosures, and we don't know the impact of that on the other person.
No. Well, but sometimes people might, you know, I've had people say, oh, you've changed your perfume, or oh, you look different today. What's different? Oh, I don't know if I like your hair color, or why have you changed your hair color? You know, how can you not answer those questions? Well, I'm not telling you why I've changed my hair color. You know, it sounds silly, but you can have these, I find with a lot of neurodivergent clients, they're interested in who you are as a person. And I wonder whether that I am as well with people, checking out, can I trust you? Are you going to be real?
I feel like the training that I received gave me like the boundaries, like strong boundaries to work out where do I then nudge against them. You know, it's like everything's open to interpretation. They appear black and white until they're not. So in that first time that I was presented by a client where, you know, they did want to know, they basically wanted a conversation with me before they launched into any therapeutic talk. So
sometimes I'll say some of the work we do feels like pre-therapy. The initial part of it is laying the foundations for the client to feel calm enough or present enough, or online, I say a lot, with their emotionality, that they can then speak about their self.
Yeah, and if I think about the relational trauma that can come along with, you know, those daily harms, what they call day-to-day harms that some neurodivergent people might experience, it's perfectly understandable to me why somebody might want to know a little bit about me. And part of my work as a therapist feels like it's okay to accommodate that. Is that not part of therapeutic healing as well?
I often sit there, and I know certainly with supervisees, we've said this, sometimes feel like, what am I doing? I'm having a conversation about slime, or it makes fart noises and people are laughing, or they're rolling around on the floor, or I've got adult clients curious about the toys and they want to talk about what toys they've had as a kid, and it's very in the moment. It's very, as Rogers would, it's in the moment, it's present, isn't it? Those conversations.
Hello, cat.
Oh, sorry. Today we are being joined by Felix, the cat. Goes to his. When I thought about this subject, I didn't really think about the autistic. I took that out of it a little bit because I think we have to look at all of therapy, not just with neurodivergent people.
Yeah.
Therapy and disclosure. It's a bigger subject, isn't it? And it's really interesting when I think, because it was something I was thinking about with this. I get quite excited when I meet someone. I get a bit I get dysregulated. My ADHD kicks in, woo. When I meet somebody who gets themselves and they can be themselves, and that can make me dysregulated. So I've got to be very aware of my neurodivergent responses, as opposed to what that might look like for someone who's neurotypical, which I have no clue. But got to be very aware of how that transmits in the room. If you're sitting with someone who's very sensitive to another, then if you start to become dysregulated because it's exciting, or it's really, you've made that really close connection, you've got to be very much aware of how that might transmit. And if you don't have your congruence in play and going, oh, I've got dysregulated just then, or oh, I've gone a little bit offline, or I've got excited, then that person could be sitting there going, what's going on with my therapist? They've gone a bit loopy. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm questioning, because again, if you go back to the idea of two people sitting in a room, and if I can't be real, why can I expect the other person to be real? That feels like, I don't know, that feels limiting in a way as well. I think the thing that keeps popping in my head is about configurations of self, and it's like when I'm sat in the therapy room as in a counselling role and in the supervision role as well, it's kind of like I'm trying to be as authentic as I can and is as appropriate for that relationship. Because even if I think about work with the same person, my configurations show up in different ways towards the end of the work compared to at the beginning. So yeah, so at the beginning it's maybe, oh, I need to be professional. Not that I'm never not that I'm not trying to be professional towards the end. Caveat. So, but you know, it's kind of like, am I what? Am I?
Well, there's a mirroring, isn't? she actually talks, this article's great. She talks about mirroring, not only being understood but mirroring, but they're mirroring back.
It's mirroring energy is, I feel like, what you were talking about when you said about getting excited because you're connecting with somebody who's getting it, or whatever that it is. It's kind of like, oh, you're not mirroring the energy, are you? You're kind of being swallowed up into your own again. So we're not at service to the client anymore, we're at service to ourselves.
Yes. So you've got to be aware of that, really aware. And if that's picked up by the client, if you don't say anything, if you're not congruent about that, if you're not saying, oh, that's given me an emotion or a feeling, then you're not being real in the room, and we're not staying with the core conditions.
This bit's making me think about those shortcuts that we take in language that we've spoke about before. That we don't complete sentences, that we leave so much unspoken. So it's like, oh, I got giddy then, but we won't say, oh, I got giddy then because X, Y, Z. Or when you said that it's that thing, isn't it, of you made me feel sad, is kind of like, it's not true, is it? It's like you said something and my response was to feel sad, and it's all shortcut language. And like even when we do those, I'm thinking about the times when I might have had a response to something and it's happened before I've thought about it, because it's such an immediate response, and immediacy is good, but immediacy with a context is good. Immediacy without a context isn't necessarily as good. So that debriefing, which I seem to do a lot of in my therapeutic work now, kind of is more about that relationship building, and are we on the same wavelength with this? I just had a really strong response to that. Do you want me to explain what that was about, or even can I explain what that was about? So again, that feels like that difference between being done to and done with.
Yes, I think you're in discovery, aren't you? You're in discovery with the client. You're discovering in any therapy, what is happening to us is making us aware of what could be happening to the client. Does that sound? What we're feeling, we have to be aware of what's happening with us, how we are functioning in the room with someone, and it can give us clues as to what's happening with the other person. We're exploring that with them, aren't we? Is that right?
Yeah, I don't think I was disagreeing with you there. I think I was more kind of thinking where the lines to that were, because if we started to think that we know how that other person is communicating, and therefore that's a sign of that, then again, that puts us back into that position of power, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's about checking it out, isn't it? I'm feeling this, I'm wondering, I'm feeling this in the room, I'm noting this in myself, I wonder what's happening for you. Can I check that out?
Yeah.
Which is,
and that actually, that adds on to what I was saying before in terms of like, can I explain what happened for me then in that response? That isn't sufficient either, is it? It's a case of coming back and saying, I'm really wondering like what that's created between us, or what that brought up for you. And that, again, it's that it feels like that dance that we get taught about, doesn't it? It's like there's a dance that goes on in therapy. A
tango or a waltz.
Yeah, which is it? But it feels like, there's all those underneath questions that kind of go on with it, isn't there? And I think I've tied myself in a bit of a knot there.
I think we've gone into territory that is quite hard to just talk about in a very flat, short level, if that makes, that's the only way I can, because there's so many parts to it. There's so many parts that you talked to the done to, you talked about, us, we can't know what another client is feeling. We talked about our feelings, we talked about what's happening with them. It's talking about checking it out. We're talking about ensuring that there's an equality in the room. and that's really hard. There's always going to be imbalances at times. I know there's so much more to it. It's a really,
there is,
you
and I don't know whether I mentioned this last time, but the lady who writes about decolonizing therapy, she's really conscious of those power dynamics in the room. Yeah, I think we talked about it before, Jennifer Mullan, yes.
Yes.
And about not referring to clients as clients, but referring to them as therapy participants. And I really liked it. But then when I've been kind of like reflecting on that while I've been writing notes and kind of doing my studies and everything else, it's kind of like, hang on a minute. So when I'm writing therapy participants, that makes me a participant in the room as well.
Can we add to that, say, collaboration of understanding?
Yeah.
Maybe what we started off with was that the client who asked lots of questions of us is connecting. It sometimes, like when you meet a new person in your life, they're curious about you because they want to understand where your standpoint, getting that, can I connect with you?
Yeah.
Even if I might have different views from you, even if you're in a different power position, can we connect on some level, exploring that? Because that's really important. We've got to, strip away any, even if we've got differences of views and viewpoints or religion or colour, can we connect in spite of? That's really important.